If you ask a die-hard Nintendo fan what one of their most anticipated games for the Nintendo Switch was, you're probably going to hear them say Metroid Prime 4. The Metroid series was right there on the NES and Super Nintendo alongside of other franchises like Mario and Zelda, and were of course some of the best games on the system. As time has gone on though, the Metroid series, especially the Prime series, seems to have become more of an afterthought for Nintendo. Sure, side games and spin-offs were released on handheld systems, and yes, the Nintendo GameCube saw 2 Metroid Prime games, but when it comes to Nintendo home consoles, the last Metroid game we saw was Metroid Prime 3 Corruption on the Nintendo Wii, which released nearly 14 years ago. 14 years ago! At E3 2017, we got the lovely splash logo for Metroid Prime 4 for the Nintendo Switch, but since then communications have died down, there's been major developmental changes, and most importantly we haven't seen a single screenshot, a single video, or anything about this game, nearly 4 years after the initial announcement. Today I want to talk about the things we know when it comes to Metroid Prime 4, the things that people expect from this game, and most importantly, what I want to see Metroid Prime 4 become, because honestly, I think this is a very pivotal game, not only for the Nintendo Switch, but for the Metroid Prime brand in general. Now before we get too deep into the Metroid lore, I want to give a huge thank you to the sponsor for this video, the Wonderful 101 Remastered. Seriously. A cult classic on the Nintendo Wii U, the Wonderful 101 Remastered is out now for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Steam. The Wonderful 101 has you controlling a team of 100 heroes at once, with the ability to draw weapons such as swords and whips, to building bridges and hang gliders via the Unite Morph system. What's even better is there's a free demo of the game available right now on all platforms that gives you a great taste of the game with up to 2 hours of gameplay, and your progress will transfer over to the main game. In the demo, called the Wonder-Sized Cadet, you even get access to an exclusive hero named Wonder Bayonetta, of course based on the hit IP Bayonetta. And the cherry on top of the Wonderful 101 Remastered cake, the game is currently on sale across all platforms at 32% off, making the game just $27.19. Check out the link in the description box down below for more information on the Wonderful 101 Remastered across all platforms, and a huge thank you to the Wonderful 101 for sponsoring this video. So like I said, when it comes to the Metroid Prime series, it seems to really vary depending on what system you're talking about. The GameCube and Wii had great Metroid Prime representation, with the first 2 games being on the GameCube, the third game being on the Wii, and a trilogy also released on the Wii to play them all. The Nintendo DS had 2 Prime games with Metroid Prime Hunters, arguably the best first-person shooter on the Nintendo DS, and Metroid Prime Pinball, which, I mean, it was cool. It had a rumble cart, that was kinda neat. The last time we saw the Metroid Prime series was back in 2016, with the highly polarizing Metroid Prime Federation Force for the Nintendo 3DS. Now some people love this game, most people didn't, and I definitely fall into the latter category with this game. Primarily because, I don't know, the Metroid Prime name just felt very tacked onto this game. Considering the fact that at the release of this game it had been roughly 9 years since a Metroid Prime game released, this wasn't what fans were hoping for or really even wanted. Now obviously the lack of success of the Wii U didn't necessarily help things as far as a consoleized Metroid Prime were concerned, but to me, even when you compare the game to Metroid Prime Hunters on the DS, Prime Hunters did a way better job of conveying that Prime feeling than Metroid Prime Federation Forces ever could. At E3 2017, Nintendo had one of their best shows ever when it comes to reveals and announcements, and the one thing that stuck in a lot of people's minds was of course Metroid Prime 4. Although it was just a splash screen with a logo, this gave hope to the Metroid faithful that finally, this drought was coming to an end. Now knowing how Nintendo handles business, they often don't talk too early about games, at least in the past decade or so. So the expectations were that this game was rather far along in development and could potentially see a release within a year or 2. Nintendo Directs came and went after the initial unveiling and, well, silence. In 2018, Reggie Fils-Aimé, who was president of Nintendo of America at the time, was asked about Metroid Prime 4 and said the game was well into development and proceeding well, which once again gave fans hopes of a glimpse of the game at E3 2018, but once again, Samus was nowhere to be found on the Switch. More Nintendo Directs came and went, and people started to wonder, well, what the hell's going on with this game? Then in 2019, Metroid fans got an absolute bombshell of an announcement. A video and statement went up in January of 2019 from Nintendo EPD General Manager Shinya Takahashi, announcing that the development on Metroid Prime 4 had restarted under Retro Studios with Kensuke Tanabe. Takahashi said that the development under the previous studio had not met Nintendo's standards, and that the decision to restart the project was not taken lightly. Back when Metroid Prime 4 was originally announced, Bill Trinan of Nintendo of America had stated that Metroid producer Tanabe was involved with Metroid Prime 4, but Retro Studios, the company behind the first 3 games in the franchise, was not. The general consensus is that the mystery company that was involved in this game was none other than Bandai Namco, working with Tanabe on the game. Now, while Bandai Namco does make some great games, looking over their catalog, you don't really see many first-person shooter or first-person adventure games. So the decision to give them this property over Retro Studios, who hasn't released anything since Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which technically was originally released back in 2014 on the Wii U, raised even more questions as to what they were doing this whole time, if not working on Metroid Prime 4. Maybe one day one of these answers will come to light, but for now, it really remains a mystery as to what Bandai Namco did so wrong with the game that Nintendo pulled the plug on it, and what Retro Studios was also doing in the meantime. So considering that the game had to be restarted, we don't know how many assets, if any assets, were salvageable from this Bandai Namco build of the game. At worst, this would mean that the game was completely rebuilt with everything a year and a half after it was announced to be coming to the Nintendo Switch. And at best, Retro Studios was able to keep some things from Bandai Namco as far as assets or visuals were concerned, as I feel that that would be the most salvageable stuff from this build, as I believe Nintendo was probably more upset with the direction of the gameplay. Since that fateful January 2019 morning, things have once again been very quiet about this game. It's been over 2 years since Nintendo has commented on this game in any capacity, and the only thing we've really been given as far as it comes to updates about the game just involves hirings from Retro Studios for Metroid Prime 4. Many industry vets from various projects have joined Retro Studio, with some people tend to correlate their previous works with the current project, but unless you're like a creative director or something, that tends to not really be the case. You're simply there to do a job with the skill set that you have, not necessarily infuse other franchises into the Metroid Prime universe. While yes, people involved from Halo, Call of Duty, Warhawk, Grand Theft Auto, and Borderlands have joined Retro's staff, once again, I don't think that's necessarily playing a role in what to expect in any way, shape, or form from the game. Even as recent as April 15th, a new hire for the game was done, with the senior lighting artist who was previously involved with God of War for the PS4 joining the team. But don't hold your breath on Samus muttering out "boy" or anything like that. So obviously, the development cycle for Metroid Prime 4 has been, well, less than ideal. Starting a game over from potentially scratch is never an easy thing to do, as you're basically back at square one a year and a half after the game was announced. While some people think that the massive hirings are a good thing with this game, I'm not so sure I necessarily feel that way, because to me, it just makes it seem like the game is that much further away from completion if you're still hiring for key positions on the project. Could we see our first glimpse of Metroid Prime 4 at E3 2021? I mean, maybe, but if I was a betting man, I would honestly bet against it. The main reason being, I feel Nintendo is going to show us the rest of the 2021 lineup, and I definitely don't foresee this game coming out this year, so pending they have a strong enough lineup without Metroid Prime 4, it seems like an easy reason to once again delay the inevitable and just stay quiet on the project. But my final question I pose is, what does Metroid Prime 4 actually need to be? What do fans want to see from this game? And is Nintendo maybe overcomplicating what Metroid Prime 4 should truly be at the end of the day? To some extent, I can honestly feel like they are, because to me, Metroid Prime 4 should be a pretty simple experience. The first 3 Metroid Prime games, the real Metroid Prime games, were built on a basic Metroid principles. Find your equipment, access different areas, battle in a first-person perspective, large bosses, and a somewhat open and isolated, desolate, beautiful world with various surroundings. Now obviously games in this style have changed since the original release of Metroid Prime back in 2002, but does Metroid really need a Breath of the Wild moment with its franchise? I don't think so, mostly because the trilogy of games were all very similar, and it's been 14 years since we got the last one. To me, if you just expand upon the Metroid Prime formula with bigger areas, bigger enemies, HD visuals, and a high layer of polish, that's going to be more than enough for people to get very excited about this game. But there is one area that definitely needs an overhaul, and that would be in the multiplayer aspect. Now I know Metroid Prime isn't a traditional first-person shooter, I get that, but a game like this will only benefit from having a strong online multiplayer component because of the replay value it'll offer. Metroid Prime Hunters on the Nintendo DS was the best online FPS for the Nintendo DS, featuring decent netcode, responsive gameplay, a ton of different maps, and even native voice chat with people utilizing the Nintendo DS's microphone. It took a game that was solid in single player to something that people could enjoy well beyond the mostly linear campaign, and added immense replay value to this game. It's 2021. It's been 14 years since Metroid Prime 3 released, and Metroid fans who grew up with the Prime games have obviously played other first-person shooters and first-person adventures, most of which would feature the story as an afterthought and focus strictly on multiplayer. Now, I definitely wouldn't do that, as I feel like the single-player experience is essential and key to the Metroid Prime games, but I do think that putting a strong emphasis on multiplayer component is a pivotal thing for Metroid Prime 4. It's been a very bumpy ride for Metroid Prime 4, but hopefully things are starting to smooth out a bit. While delays can be good for a game, you have to think about games like Duke Nukem Forever, which were delayed a million times and still came out rather rough. I don't think Metroid Prime 4 will suffer the same fate, but you do have to wonder what's going on behind the scenes with this game. Will we see a glimpse of Metroid Prime 4 in 2021? Possibly the second half of the year, but like I said, E3 2021 just seems a bit too soon to see Samus in action. I just hope the game turns out good. I love the Metroid Prime series, and as someone who bought Metroid Prime 3 Corruption on day one for the Nintendo Wii, it's been a long 14 years waiting for the next game in the franchise. But then again, Spawnwave did say that the Metroid Prime HD Trilogy Collection was coming to the Nintendo Switch, so maybe they'll release that and tide us over. Alright, so that was a deep dive into Metroid Prime 4, the story thus far, what's been happening, what the future holds for this game, and what I expect to see from this game. I honestly had a really good time making this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was fun, researching stuff and digging up the real stories behind what's going on with this game, because it's so mysterious, and you would think it would be very easy to find info on this game because it's such a big game, yet so many people are tight-lipped about it. So let me know in the comments section down below what you think of this whole Metroid Prime 4 situation, when you expect to see the game, and most importantly, what you want this game to be. Does it need a Breath of the Wild moment, or would you be happy with that standard Metroid Prime formula just updated to the modern age? And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, like the video as well. Huge thank you to the wonderful 101 Remastered for sponsoring this video. Make sure you guys check out the link in the description box down below, and as always, folks, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.